Ethan and his two college friends, Mark and Daniel, had been talking about a reunion trip for months. Life had scattered them across different states after graduation. Ethan worked long hours at a law firm in Chicago. Mark was based in San Francisco grinding away at a tech startup, and Daniel had just started teaching high school history in Texas. They missed the simplicity of their old dorm days, the kind of nights where conversations lasted until sunrise. Finally, schedules lined up. They booked an Airbnb cabin in Vermont, tucked deep in the woods. The listing looked almost unreal. A cozy wooden cottage with a wraparound porch, a fireplace, and panoramic windows overlooking endless pine trees. The photos gave off the perfect rustic vibe, almost like a postcard. Reviews raved about the host being extremely accommodating and keeping the place spotless. The drive there was long but filled with laughter, playlists from their college days, and that familiar banter that made them forget years had passed. By the time they arrived, the sun was setting. The cabin looked exactly like the photos, maybe even better. Quiet, remote, the kind of place where cell service came and went like a coin toss. Inside, everything seemed too perfect. Throw pillows lined the couch in a flawless row. The bookshelf was stacked with neatly arranged hardcovers, and there were fresh flowers in a vase on the coffee table. It felt staged. Ethan raised an eyebrow and joked, "Feels like we just stepped onto the set of a commercial. You sure this isn't some kind of HGTV trap?" Mark chuckled. "Man, relax. Not everyone lives like you. Some people actually know how to decorate." The first evening passed easily. They grilled outside, had a few beers, and argued over whether or not to start a campfire. When exhaustion hit, they turned in early. But Ethan couldn't sleep. He lay awake, staring at the wooden ceiling beams. Outside, the wind pressed through the trees, making the forest sound alive. Leaves rustling, branches knocking faintly together. The silence of the cabin amplified every sound, every creak of wood settling. Around 2 a.m., he heard a faint click. It was subtle, like a switch being flipped. He froze, eyes scanning the room. Mark and Daniel were both sound asleep. A few seconds later, the sound came again. Click. Ethan sat up in bed, pulse picking up. It wasn't the kind of sound you could easily brush off. Not pipes, not the wind. It was mechanical, deliberate. His eyes landed on the smoke detector mounted near the ceiling, right above the far corner of the room. For a moment, he could have sworn he saw the tiniest glint of red light blink and then vanish. He told himself it was nothing, probably just fatigue, and his imagination working overtime after a long day of travel. Still, he couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that something in the cabin was watching them. The next morning, Ethan said nothing about what he'd heard. It felt silly to bring up. A random click in the middle of the night? Mark and Daniel would just laugh it off, chalk it up to jet lag and nerves. Besides, the sunlight pouring into the cabin made the place seem almost too normal. Safe. They spent the day hiking a nearby trail, taking photos, and joking about how out of shape they were. By the time they got back, the cabin's fireplace was calling their names. They ate takeout pizza, cracked open a few more beers, and by midnight, Mark had passed out on the couch. Ethan and Daniel stayed up a little longer, flipping through the books stacked on the shelf. That's when Ethan noticed something odd. A small, hardback novel, The Catcher in the Rye, sat slightly crooked among the perfectly lined spines. He pulled it out, expecting to find some old notes or maybe a forgotten receipt. Instead, the book was completely hollowed out. Inside was a tiny black device, about the size of a matchbox. "Dude, what the hell is this?" Ethan whispered. Daniel leaned in, frowning. "That's a camera. Look at the lens." Ethan's chest tightened. His mind flashed back to the faint clicks from the night before. He stared up at the bookshelf, then around the cabin. The sudden perfection of the room no longer looked cozy. It looked curated, placed, like a stage set, just as he'd joked earlier. They checked the smoke detector. The screws looked recently disturbed, faint scratches around the edges. Daniel stood on a chair, twisted the cover off, and his face went pale. Inside was a small camera with a glowing green light. "Are you kidding me?" Ethan's voice cracked louder than he intended. Mark stirred on the couch, but didn't wake. Daniel carefully pulled the battery out and held the device in his hand, as if it might burn him. "Someone's watching us." Ethan's stomach turned. Every moment replayed in his head. Changing clothes, showering, sitting around in their boxers drinking beer. He felt sick. They tore through the cabin like men possessed. Behind picture frames, inside lampshades, even tucked in the corner of the TV stand. More cameras. Tiny, black, and silent. Watching. Recording. By the time they were done, they'd found six different hidden cameras in a cabin that was supposed to be their private escape. The air in the room had changed. The warmth of the fire suddenly felt oppressive. Every shadow in the cabin looked like it might be hiding another lens. Daniel whispered, "What do we do? Do we call the cops? Pack up and leave." Ethan couldn't answer right away. His ears were ringing, his hands trembling. He turned the smoke detector camera over in his hand, and for a brief second, he thought he saw the tiny lens adjust, as if whoever was on the other end knew they'd been found. Discovery of those 6 cameras left the cabin silent. Not the comfortable kind of silence that came with being far away from the city, but a brittle, suffocating one. Daniel sat on the couch, pale, clutching one of the tiny black devices like it might explain itself if he stared long enough. Mark was finally awake, confused and groggy, demanding to know what was going on. When Ethan explained, Mark thought it was some kind of prank. Come on, no way. Airbnb would never allow that. But his smirk died the moment Daniel shoved the hollowed-out book into his hands. He saw the hidden camera inside, and his face drained of color. Panic set in. Ethan grabbed his phone to call the police, but the signal bars had dropped to 0. No service, no Wi-Fi either. The router in the corner blinked with a red light, as though it had been cut off. "Okay," Daniel whispered, voice trembling. "We need to leave. Now." They scrambled to pack. The cabin, which had felt warm and inviting just a day ago, suddenly seemed like a trap. Every wall, every piece of furniture felt tainted. Who knew what else had a lens? They didn't care about leaving things behind. Wallets, clothes, food. They just wanted out. But when Ethan stepped outside, duffel bag slung over his shoulder, his body froze. Parked at the bottom of the gravel driveway, maybe 50 feet away, was a dark SUV. Its headlights weren't on, but he could see the faint glow of someone sitting inside. "Watching. Guys?" Ethan hissed, pointing. The 3 of them ducked back inside, hearts racing. The host lived 2 hours away. At least, that's what the listing had said. So who was in that car? Mark, trying to sound braver than he looked, said, "Maybe it's just some random driver." "No," Ethan shot back. "Nobody randomly parks in the middle of nowhere at 3 in the morning." The thought hung in the air. Whoever had been watching them through the cameras might already be here. Daniel whispered, "What if there are more cameras outside? What if they know we found them?" As if on cue, the smoke detector in Ethan's hand emitted a faint click, the same sound that had woken him the first night. It wasn't just off. The lens moved, adjusting its focus, as though someone on the other end was zooming in. Ethan hurled it across the room, heart hammering. Moments later, the cabin's lights flickered, once, twice, and went out. Total darkness. Mark cursed under his breath, fumbling with his phone's flashlight. Daniel gripped the nearest object he could use as a weapon, a fireplace poker. The beam of light shook in Mark's trembling hands as he swept it across the room. In the window's reflection, Ethan swore he saw movement. A figure, tall and still, standing just beyond the glass. When the flashlight caught the window, nothing was there. But the imprint of a face, fogged breath against the cold pane, lingered for a few seconds before fading. They didn't wait. They bolted. Bags forgotten, hearts pounding, feet crunching against gravel as they sprinted toward their car. The SUV down the hill started its engine. Headlights flared on, blinding them. Ethan jammed the keys into their rental car's ignition, but his hands were shaking so badly he fumbled. The SUV began rolling up the driveway, slow but deliberate, blocking their only way out. Finally, the engine roared to life. Ethan slammed the gear into reverse, tearing the car backward down a narrow path around the cabin, branches scraping metal as they forced their way through the trees. The SUV's headlights swung, following them. They didn't stop driving for hours. Not until the sun rose, and they reached a gas station on the edge of a small town. Only then did they dare look back. The cabin's listing was gone from Airbnb by the time they checked. Completely erased. The profile of the friendly host no longer existed. When they tried to report what happened, the local sheriff's department shrugged, saying without physical proof, there wasn't much they could do. But Ethan couldn't forget. Not the faint clicks, not the red blink of the cameras, not the breath mark on the glass. And every now and then, when he scrolls through his phone late at night, he swears he sees old photos of himself and his friends. Pictures they never took, in angles they never posed for. Like someone somewhere still has the footage,